the 20-year-old student drove home by car and disappeared without a trace. The investigation of this case at first seemed extremely difficult to the police, but every day they became convinced that the solution was right before their eyes all this time. Carrie was born on February 11, 1966 in California. Her family, which included 4 children, lived in a suburb of San Diego called El Cajon. After high school, Carrie decided that she wanted to become a teacher, so she entered the University of San Diego. She began to live with her parents, and it took her about 20 minutes to get to campus. For her 20th birthday, her father gave Carrie a car that she had long dreamed of, white Volkswagen 1968. She also worked part-time at a local zoo, donating the money she earned to help injured animals. Carrie also worked at a small health food store. It seemed that everything in her life was going as well as possible, and a happy future awaited the girl. Over the holidays, she spent a lot of time with friends and family, and also regularly visited her boyfriend, Wayne. He lived 50 kilometers from her in the small town of Escondida. On the morning of December 27, 1986, Carrie decided to go see him for the day because he was sick and needed care. The girl stayed at his house until 8 p.m. Then she called her father and said that she was going to go home. Her journey should have taken no more than an hour, but it was getting close to night, and Carrie was still missing. Her father began to worry. First, he called her boyfriend, thinking that Carrie might be staying there. However, the young man said that she left almost immediately after the call home. After waiting several hours, the father and mother decided to go in search of their daughter. There were 2 roads from Wayne's house to El Cajon. Therefore, the parents decided to separate. After some time, Carrie's older sisters and brother joined them. All nights they did not inspect the roads along which the girl was supposed to travel. At some point, her father decided to go to the police, but they refused to accept his statement. Given that Carrie was 20 years old at the time, it was necessary to wait 24 hours from the moment of her disappearance before contacting the police. Therefore, the family continued the search on their own, and by morning a disturbing discovery awaited them. One of Carrie's sisters and her husband decided to turn off the highway and drive along it, since the family had already explored the main roads more than once. After driving a few minutes along a country road, they noticed a white car parked in the distance. It was Carrie's Volkswagen. The doors were open, the windows were down. Her purse was inside, and her keys were in the ignition, but Carrie herself was nowhere to be found. Then her sister contacted her relatives and the police, who this time accepted the appeal and came to the place. While some detectives were examining the car, others were searching the area in search of the missing girl. One of the officers walked along the road to the old bridge and noticed someone's body in the bushes below it. Having descended, he realized that in front of him was Carrie. Her relatives, who were nearby at that time, identified the girl. They hoped to the last that they would be able to find Carrie alive. However, the reality turned out to be much more tragic. The police were unable to find any significant evidence at the crime scene. The only thing they were able to find were tire tracks on the bridge, which were wider than the wheels of Carrie's Volkswagen. Medical experts examined the body and concluded that the girl received several blows to the head and was strangled. However, there were no signs of violence, which made the killer's motive completely unclear. Nothing was also missing from her car, including her wallet and documents. Detectives began to reconstruct the chronology of the events of that evening. They established that Carrie left her boyfriend's house at about 8:30 in the evening. Based on the receipt found in her car, they determined that the girl had stopped at a gas station not far from the place where her body would later be found. Unfortunately, the complete lack of evidence did not allow the investigator to answer the question of why Carrie turned off the highway onto an abandoned bridge. The first suspect in this case was her boyfriend, Wayne. He was the last person to see Carrie that evening. However, the young man said that he was at home until the night. When he found out that Carrie had not returned home, and the whole family was looking for her, he also decided to go in search. His sister confirmed that he left the house late at night. The police believed that the girl was killed between 9 and 10 p.m. Wayne's father was the next suspect. He owned a health food store, where Carrie worked part-time in her free time from school. There was no evidence against him either, but the police noticed several strange things. Firstly, it seemed to them that at Carrie's funeral the man was somehow too upset for a person who was not even her relative. Secondly, he had a reputation as a man who liked to flirt with all the girls in a row. Another tip came from a witness. The police were informed that they saw a gold-colored Cadillac with a blonde in the front seat not far from where Carrie was found. Wayne's father owned the same car. The police decided to question him, but the man denied his involvement in the murder. As evidence, he provided his call records, which showed that he was more than an hour away from that location at the time of Carrie's death. This was enough to remove suspicion from him. In the absence of other suspects, detectives decided to turn to the public. Carrie's story was actively covered on television and radio, so the police asked them to report any strange or suspicious things that people might have noticed on the day of the murder. In addition, the local TV channel decided to film a program dedicated to road safety. Together with the police department, they told viewers about the dangers that can await people on the highways and how to behave in a critical situation. After the release of this program, the police received about 300 calls from people who shared various tips on Carrie's case. However, detectives quickly noticed that some calls overlapped. Several dozen women reported that something strange happened to them near the place where the girl's body was discovered. They all said that they were stopped on that highway by Patrol Officer Craig Payer. He behaved very doubtfully. Some women assured that after stopping, he started talking to them about personal topics, and gradually began to ask questions of an intimate and vulgar nature. These conversations could last from several tens of minutes to a couple of hours, and sometimes the officer even sat in the passenger seat with the girls. All this happened only when they were traveling alone. But the most suspicious thing awaited the detectives ahead. Several women said Payer asked them to pull off the highway onto the same road where Carrie's car was found. Sometimes he also allowed himself to touch women. Some of them reported that during the conversation, he began to stroke their hair and shoulders. All these requests were enough for detectives to begin to seriously consider their colleague as a suspect. However, his biography looked almost flawless. The 38-year-old Vietnam veteran had been a patrol officer for 13 years and was in good standing. He was married and had 2 children. Colleagues spoke of him as a professional in his field, who often became an exemplary employee in many respects. But the detectives began to dig deeper, and they discovered the first alarm bells. It turned out that Payer had repeatedly received complaints from women whom he stopped for no reason and behaved inappropriately. However, all these appeals did not lead to any action. The management referred to the officer's impeccable reputation and came to the conclusion that he did not exceed his official authority. Following this, the detectives noticed something else. Payer took part in the filming of a program about road safety that aired a few days after Carrie's murder. Reporters rode with him in a patrol car and interviewed him. The footage showed fresh scratches on the man's face. According to the rules, he was required to indicate the origin of these injuries in the report at the end of the shift. It turned out that the scars appeared exactly on the day of Carrie's murder, and his explanation for some reason sounded extremely strange. According to him, he came to the police station to refuel his car, accidentally spilled gasoline, slipped on it, and fell face down on a fence with barbed wire. Next, the detectives decided to look at Payer's work card, which he had to fill out every shift. It contained information about drivers stopping, including the exact time. They immediately noticed something strange on the card for December 27th. One line had clearly been erased, and in its place was written information about the driver stopping at 9:30 p.m. right around the time Carrie was supposedly killed. This could indicate that Payer deliberately made changes to the card so that he would have an alibi. Upon closer examination of the card, Detectives determined that the line originally read 10:30 p.m. Based on all of the above, detectives decided to examine his patrol car. Firstly, the size of the tires exactly matched the tracks found on the abandoned bridge. Secondly, they found a piece of rope in the trunk under the spare tire, which was handed over to experts. Comparing it with the marks on the neck of the punishment, they came to the conclusion that this particular rope could have become the murder weapon. With all this information in hand, detectives decided to interrogate Payer for the first time. He denied any involvement and said that at the time of the murder he was several kilometers away from that place, issuing a ticket to another driver. He also voluntarily gave detectives the uniform he was wearing that evening. Unfortunately, they did not have a killer DNA sample on their hands, and even in those years they would not have had the opportunity to study it. However, studying the form bore fruit. Tiny particles of golden fabric were found on Carrie's clothing. Payer's uniform had stripes of the exact same color, and they were sent to the laboratory. Experts have determined that the particles on Carrie's clothes completely match the fabric from which the patches are made. Detectives found another lead, but this time in the opposite direction. Pieces of purple fabric were found on Payer's uniform and boots, which completely matched the material of Carrie's pants. Having examined the girl's clothes in more detail, experts found a small drop of blood on her shoes. They could not conduct a DNA analysis, but it was established that the blood belonged to the fourth negative group, the rarest in humans. Carrie had a different group, but Payer had exactly that. Detectives theorized that the blood may have gotten onto the victim's shoe after she scratched her killer. Thanks to information from Payer's card, investigators found the driver he allegedly wrote a ticket to at the same time Carrie was killed. The man stated that the officer stopped him at about 11:30 p.m. and corrected the time on his card several times in front of him. While detectives were processing all this information, new witnesses continued to come to them. One of them stated that he saw Carrie that evening at a gas station just a few kilometers from the place of her death. According to him, the girl turned off the highway towards a country road, and a police patrol car followed her. As soon as Payer's colleagues became aware of suspicions against him, they shared their observations with detectives. The man showed increased interest in this case, and constantly asked everyone if they knew any new details. He also often said that the killer should not be blamed for what happened, because it could have been an accident. But the most terrible story came from his colleague, who had only recently joined the service. She said that long before these events, Payer brought her to the very bridge under which Carrie was found, and said that this was the ideal place to dump the body. Detectives also spoke with the desk officer who was working at the station on the day of Carrie's murder. According to him, when Payer arrived there to gas up the car, there were already fresh scratches on his face. This contradicted the man's version, according to which he fell on the fence. His colleagues also said that such a turn of events was impossible. Payer's parking space was 3 meters from the fence, and the barbed wire was higher than his head. Despite the fact that all this evidence was circumstantial from a legal point of view, detectives still arrested Payer on January 17, 1987. He continued to protest his innocence, so the case went to trial. Payer's lawyer insisted that all this circumstantial evidence in no way indicates his client's guilt. He pointed to the man's impeccable reputation, his long service in the police, and his success in his position. However, the prosecution believed that this amount of circumstantial evidence in total provides irrefutable evidence of his guilt. Payer deliberately falsified his own work card to speed up his time away from duty. He lied about getting scratches on the evening of Carrie's death, and nearly 30 women accused him of inappropriate behavior. Due to the lack of direct evidence, this trial turned out to be very difficult. The jury could not decide on their decision for a whole week, and in the end they were divided. Because of this, the judge had to recognize this trial as invalid and order a new one. At the second trial, a new prosecutor was appointed, who managed to defeat many of the arguments of Payer's lawyer. Some of his colleagues testified at the trial, and said that they saw him fall on the fence. However, under pressure from the prosecutor, they all admitted that in fact they were not there, and they simply repeated the story that Peyer told them. Following a new trial, the jury found him guilty of murder, and the man was sentenced to 25 years to life. Since then, Peyer has filed multiple appeals, each of which was rejected. But in 2004, something strange happened. The man was offered to prove his innocence using DNA analysis, which by that time was already actively used. Experts could compare his sample with the blood found on Carrie's shoe. And here Peyer, who continued to insist on his innocence, simply refused without explanation. After that, few people doubted that it was he who killed her. Most likely, the man understood that in this way his guilt would be proven 100%. But at the same time, he continued to submit requests for parole, which were successfully rejected. At the moment, he will be able to submit a new plea only in 2027, when he will be 77 years old. Carrie's family worked hard to ensure that her death was not in vain. They got several laws changed and established a university scholarship in her name. Carrie's father also sued the state government for allowing such a dangerous man to join the police force. He won the case and received compensation of $2,700,000. After that, he ensured that a nature reserve be made on abandoned land near the place where his daughter died. It was named in memory of Carrie and other crime victims. Unfortunately, the girl's father died of a heart attack while visiting this reserve in 2000. Thus, in this complicated case, despite the lack of significant evidence, Peyer's guilt is obvious. He had a chance to be released by providing his DNA sample for comparison. His refusal only convinced everyone that he was the killer,